Hey everybody, it is Tash B and welcome to another episode of Tash B TV. Now today you are in for a very special treat. I am speaking to Dr. Samantha Hardy, who is a leader in the field of conflict resolution. She is a practical thinker and a thinking practitioner. Sam was actually one of my lecturers when I went through and did the Master in Conflict Management and Resolution program just recently. And she has just a wealth of experience, not just teaching here locally in Australia, but also overseas as well. She works with other universities around the globe. She also has written or participated in writing a huge number of books on the topic of conflict management and working through mediation. So Sam, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Tash. It's great to be here. Good to catch up.
Thank you. Yes. So you have had a massive journey working through conflict and conflict management. So tell me, what sparked your interest in going down this route for a career?
Yeah, okay. Well, when I was at school, I did pretty well at school. I don't think because I was particularly bright, but I was a hard worker. I like to work hard, do my homework, those sorts of things. And so I got really good marks at school, and it was basically family pressure, do medicine or law, you're a smart girl. And I wasn't so good with blood, so I decided I'd go into the law. So I did actually a law degree, and I worked as a litigation lawyer for 5 years in a big law firm in Queensland. So doing lots of time in court. It was very exciting, but I was starting to get a little bit, worried that even when my clients won in court, they never seemed to be all that happy at the end of it. Part of that was because of the big legal bill we'd give them. But part of it is also that even when they won, it didn't really feel like they'd won. Often their relationships had broken down over it. They were really stressed. They'd wasted a whole lot of time and money in court. And around that time, so I've been practicing as a lawyer for 5 years. I did a Master's of Law, and part of that included a subject called alternative dispute resolution. And I did this subject and thought, wow, this is really cool. Like, there's a better way to manage conflict. And as part of it, they allowed people who did this subject to do an extra weekend of training and get this was in 97, I think, Certificate 3 in community mediation. So it was the earliest form of mediation accreditation. And I did that, and I had this kind of epiphany. I was like, oh my God, there's such a better way to resolve conflict than going to court. So much to the horror of my family, I quit my job as a lawyer. I went back to university, I know, and I enrolled in a PhD studying, I wasn't really sure what I was studying when I started, but it was something to do with conflict and the difference between going to court and mediation. And I started teaching in law schools to kind of pay my way through the PhD. And yeah, I did a PhD, and I looked at the stories that people tell themselves about conflict and how those stories can get people stuck in a way that they can't move out of the conflict, and they sort of dig themselves a hole and then feel miserable in it. But I also looked at what helped people shift out of that way of thinking into something more constructive. So from then on, I worked in law schools and in conflict management programs as kind of my main job, but I also practiced as a mediator and a conflict coach on the side. And that's pretty much where I got to. And just recently I've stopped working full-time in universities now. I just do a little bit of contract work here and there. And I have my own practice now doing some private training, as well as mediation and coaching. So yeah, that's kind of, I did a whole turnaround from the dark side of the law to kind of, the good guys of conflict resolution and mediation.
So perhaps for those people who don't have a full understanding of what you're speaking about in regards to mediation and conflict coaching, and alternative dispute resolution, could you maybe explain that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So most people, when they have conflict, they think, oh, I need some help with my conflict, who do I go to? And most people think lawyers, right?
Yeah.
And lawyers can be really useful, and they can help resolve conflict to a certain extent, but it tends to be with a really legal framework, and it doesn't concentrate so much on people's relationships and their underlying needs and concerns. It's very much a structured, pragmatic, commercial type approach to resolving conflict. So mediation is a process where an independent third party who might be a lawyer or they might have some other kind of background basically sits down with people in conflict and helps them to have a conversation together to try and figure it out themselves, to try and come up with an agreement that works for them rather than have one imposed on them by a judge or an arbitrator or somebody who doesn't really understand them or the problem. And a coach is someone who works one-on-one with people in conflict to help them manage conflict themselves better, which might lead to them resolving the conflict with the person they're in conflict with. So basically a mediator works with more than one person and a conflict coach works with one person to help them do it themselves and do it in a way that's meaningful for them and not be just sucked into a legal system that kind of takes over and then imposes an outcome and costs a lot of money.
Right. Okay. So what you're really saying then is that if I worked through my conflict through the legal system, I'm going to have a decision imposed on me by somebody else. But working through mediation, conflict coaching, alternative dispute resolution, it's about me being in charge and I get to work through the process myself. So how do you find that in that space then? Because you've seen both sides of it. Where do you feel as though the people reach a better outcome?
Look, I think if you want a quick outcome, in a way, going to court isn't super quick, but it can be easy in a way that you don't have to do much. Like the lawyers take over and they argue it out and you get given an outcome. But you don't have a lot of control. And as I said, the outcome's very narrow. It's often very commercially focused because courts don't deal with personalities and emotions and relationships. They deal with really pragmatic stuff. So the difference for me with mediation and coaching is you can tailor an outcome that meets all of your needs, that deals with issues in the relationship, that deals with breakdowns in communication, and it can actually repair relationships, sometimes really improve relationships by having those conversations with the support of a mediator or a coach that you don't have in court. In court, you don't really talk to the other side. The lawyers do all the talking. So it's really a resolution completely separate from you. Whereas when you're in a mediation, it's all about you and what's important to you, not what's important to the law or the judge. And so people who go through mediation, they find it hard work. Let's be honest, it's hard work because you've got to have really difficult conversations sometimes.
Yes.
But what tends to happen is if they reach agreement, they tend to stick with it. It tends to meet more of their needs and it tends to last. So often what happens in court, you get an agreement, you don't really like the outcome, but you don't have a choice. You have to suck it up. But then you end up with a whole new lot of conflict. You feel resentful about your lawyer not doing a good enough job or the court not giving you the outcome you want, and you still hate the other person because you still haven't talked to them about it.
Yes.
Whereas in mediation, it's a lot more holistic. You can have a lot more benefits other than just resolving the pragmatic stuff. You can resolve and work on a whole lot of stuff around relationship, communication, underlying needs. So for me, it's a whole lot more valuable. It's a whole nother level.
Yeah, so really if we're looking at it from a business perspective, which that's what this show is about, is talking to people about business, that mediation and coaching would sound like a really great option for people to go down if they're in a small business, or not just in a small business, if they're having conflict internally with employees or even externally with some customers or suppliers, etc. Because being in small business, it's really about relationships. From having a small group of staff through to a small group of clients. So do you work with people in that space too, small businesses?
Definitely. And I think there's a couple of benefits for small businesses. Firstly, going to court is super expensive and it takes a lot of time. And it's not just the time of actually being in court. You have to spend a lot of time meeting with your lawyers and preparing documents, and a lot of the preparation is for the lawyers and the court's benefit to fit in with their processes and frameworks. It's not necessarily something that you as an individual or as a business see as directly relevant to what's concerning you. In mediation, we just focus on you, your needs, and it's really personalised, and it takes less time. There's a lot less paperwork, and you've got direct control. You make a decision about whether or not any agreement that you talk about is going to work for you. You can say no, you don't have to agree. but you've got a lot of opportunities to look at a range of different options that might suit you. So it's cost effective, it's much more personalised, and you're in control, and that's really important. One of the things that I noticed in my research and my practice is people who go to court, they lose control of their conflict. The lawyers take over, and you don't want that in a small business. You know, you need to keep control of, you know, your little world and make sure it's right for you and your clients and your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things you just touched on there was around time, the time out of your business. And that's a really important thing, because as a small business owner, I don't have the time to lose, you know, what would I be looking at? Maybe a week, 2 weeks, a month out of my business if I was to go down that legal path, as opposed to going down a mediation path.
Yeah, for sure. And there's, you know, that's just the time maybe in court, but you've got hours and hours of preparation, and you pay the lawyers for all that preparation time. You don't just pay them for the turning up at court. Whereas with mediation, you usually just pay the mediator for the time that you spend in the mediation. There's usually a couple of hours preparation where the mediator would work with the individuals concerned before they come in a room together. But it's a lot less time. It's a lot better value for money.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, with mediation, you can do it early. You know, you can do it at a stage before things get really, really bad. Going to court is usually sort of your last resort. So people go to court once things have got really bad and that things are a bit out of control and they don't know how to fix it themselves. Mediation can be really useful early on. So as a problem starts to arrive, you can get some help from a mediator or a coach to manage it early, which means it's easier to fix, you have less fallout, you have less costs, and you don't have access to the court system until it's worst case scenario.
Right.
So I think that's another real benefit for small business. There's support out there to help you manage conflict early and constructively before it gets expensive and starts damaging your business and your stress levels.
Yes, and I think to relationship as well, because the earlier you deal with the conflict, the easier it is to rebuild the relationship, because quite often in a small business, I may have had a conflict with a customer, but we might still live in the same town or, you know, associate in the same circles. And so, you know, we don't want it to get really, you know, impact outside of just my business, because, you know, I might still bump into them down at the, you know, local netball stadium, for example.
For sure. And the other thing I think that's really useful about things like mediation and coaching is they don't just help you resolve the conflict that you're in, they help you develop some skills and strategies for working with conflicts in the future. So you learn from that experience as well, and it might help you prevent or better manage conflict in the future, rather than just fix this one particular problem. So you get added value out of that kind of service.
Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because it is, you're constantly learning, and so you pick up new tips on how to manage the conflict, and also, you know, just how to speak to people and ask the right types of questions to help you in future. I really like that. That's a great tip. Thank you. So if I was to choose to go down the path of mediation for a conflict that I'm experiencing at the moment in my small business, how would I go about doing that?
Okay, so the first thing, I guess, is to find a mediator, find someone who's suitable. In Australia, there's a system called the National Mediator Accreditation System. So they're mediators who've gone through a prescribed amount of training and have been assessed as competent. And so it's an entry-level kind of certification. Yes. You can go to the Mediator Standards Board website, have a look for an accredited mediator in your area, and then you can just contact them directly. I think it's really important, though, if you know people who've been through mediation, to ask them about the mediators that they've used, because mediators are very, very different in terms of their styles, how they relate to the clients. And I think not all mediators are the same. So it's really important as a person going and looking for a mediator to ask questions, find out, you know, what the person's like, what their style's like, what sort of things they do and don't do in the mediation. Find someone who's accredited. I think that's a good little sort of security to make sure that they're at a certain standard, and word of mouth. And usually you just contact someone and say, hey, this is who I am, I've got a conflict. They'll usually do an intake session where they'll have a chat to you, and that's often free, where you can just talk through, you know, what's going on and whether or not mediation and this particular mediator might help you. And then they will usually give you instructions from there about how things work. They'll often get you to sign an agreement, appointing them as a mediator, that will talk about how to contact the other side and get them involved. And usually it can be really quick. It can happen in a matter of a week or two, even faster if it's urgent.
Yes. See, that's fantastic. I must admit, when I went through the program, and because I hadn't had any experience in mediation at all, ever in my life. And I must admit, when I walked in to start doing the training, I was a little bit of, oh, for goodness sakes, you know, is it just these people that get together and just have things to complain about? But then when I did the training and got involved in it, I am now just an absolute huge advocate for the process. I just think it's fantastic how transformational it is that you can go from being at absolute loggerheads for, you know, a period of time, but having the opportunity just to speak and to have your voice heard, and to listen, you know, to have to stop and listen to the other side as well. I think it's, from, you know, everything that I experienced, you know, and granted it was only in a training space, I haven't practiced in the space. I don't know if I will or if I won't yet, but we'll wait and see. But I just think it's a fantastic way to resolve conflict at any level. So yes, that's my.
And I think the thing, people are nervous about it because when you're in conflict with someone, you don't really want to sit down with the other person. You know, it's a bit scary, and you maybe haven't communicated well for quite some time. And that's what a mediator really helps you with. They're there to support you and the other person. They'll meet with both of you separately first to help you get prepared and feel a bit more confident about what you might need to have a conversation about. And they're there to help you manage the conversation so it doesn't get destructive, so you don't end up screaming at each other and making things worse. The mediator's there to really support you, to have a constructive conversation about the things that matter, to help the other person listen to you, and also to help you to listen to the other person, to keep a record of the things that you're talking about. The mediator's there to really support you to be able to have that really tricky conversation that we often can't do by ourselves because our emotions get in the way and we end up not listening. You know, it's like, la, 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 I don't want to listen to you. And it gets all really yucky. The mediator's there to help you get through that so that you actually can communicate and move forward. So it's a really invaluable service.
Oh, absolutely. Fantastic. Now let's touch on to the other side of your experience and your business and how you work and support people, which is conflict coaching. So again, I must admit, when I walked into this space, I was sort of there thinking, I don't like conflict. I really don't like conflict. I would like to, you know, as much as I wouldn't say that I try to purposely avoid conflict, but, you know, I don't like to get angry and get myself worked up. And, but again, I did your program as part of my master's, and you know, found it amazing. So talk to us about conflict coaching now.
Sure. So conflict coaching started out as a service. It was kind of a cross between executive or business coaching or leadership coaching and conflict resolution. So what actually happened, it actually started, weirdly enough, in Adelaide in Australia in a university. That was the first recorded use of something like conflict coaching. And what happened was they had a mediation service in a university for students who were in conflict with one another to come and get support of a mediator. But what sometimes would happen is one person wouldn't turn up to the mediation for various reasons. You know, they may have been sick or it might have just been too much for them. But they would just have one person turn up and then they didn't know what to do with them because, you know, a mediator works with both people. So they developed a system where they could still help that one person think more carefully about their conflict and maybe develop some strategies that they as an individual could implement to try and make the conflict a bit more manageable or maybe even be resolved by this person doing something themselves.
Yes.
And it's really developed from there. There's a number of different models out there. But basically the premise behind it is a lot of the problem with conflict is our individual approach to it, the way we think about it, the way that it develops our emotional responses. And if one person slightly changes their way of thinking or their behaviours, it can impact on the other person. And so instead of being reactive and making it worse, it starts to get a little bit better. So one person changing their thinking and behaviour can make a significant difference to the conflict between two people. So conflict coaching works with an individual. You go through their conflict story, you help them understand it more carefully. So we really slow down and we look in all the little nooks and crannies of the story. We make sure they've got all the facts straight, that they're not missing any information. And if they are missing information, we help them figure out how they can find out what they need to know. And we help them basically develop their competence and their confidence to go back and talk to the other person or people they're in conflict with, so that they can be a bit more constructive in the way that they interact with the other side. And very often it means that people can resolve the conflict themselves. They don't even need a mediator if they have a little bit of one-on-one support. So it's like having kind of a little angel on your shoulder, kind of whispering in your ear going, hey, think about this. Hey, look at that. Have you thought about this? What about trying that? And it really helps people to change the way they think about conflict and how they react to things that might trigger them in conflict, so that when they go back to talk to the other person, hopefully it's a much more constructive conversation.
Yeah, I like that. Competence and confidence to then go back to speak to the other person, because quite often that's what's going on, isn't it? That you feel as though you don't know enough about the story, or you're not getting your point of view across, or there's something going on there, and you're also nervous because, of course, we don't want to get in there and confront. So I love that conflict coaching works to build competence and confidence. Because I mean, quite often you still, we still need to interact with the other person who we may have had the disagreement about, particularly if we're talking in business. And so maybe we might move into that space then, because in workplaces, that this is something that comes up quite often in workplaces, because we've got different people with different things going on for them outside of the business. And you work with quite a few people in that space too, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And workplaces are really tricky because, as you said, you've got lots of different people, different age generations, different cultural backgrounds, different personal experiences, different styles in how they communicate or how they typically react to conflict. Some people might be really get in there and have a hard conversation, and other people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about it, it's a bit icky. So you've got to manage all these different people with all these different personalities and responses to conflict. And mostly they're in an ongoing relationship. You've got to keep working together. And a lot of people in the workplace think conflict's a bad thing, but actually it can be really useful too, because disagreement means that we have to explain ourselves more clearly. We have to advocate for our point of view. And when people do that constructively, there's lots of opportunities for change and development and innovation, because when people disagree, you've got to figure out cool, tricky ways to get around it. And so lots of really cool things happen if you have conflict constructively in a supportive environment.
Yeah, I love that, because exactly, conflict is constructive because it's because you've come into conflict because something's clashing and it's not working. So yeah, you've got to think about how are we going to innovate, how are we going to evolve, and that's it too in business as in life. It's constant evolution. We've got to constantly find new and better ways to do things. And I really love what you just said there about how working with the different people can bring the opportunity for change in a positive manner, because we're looking at things, we're trying to resolve this conflict that's occurring. So what are some of the key things where you see conflict occurs in a workplace, perhaps maybe in a small business? I don't know, I'm sure that it's probably this big, but what are sort of some of the common themes that you've seen, Sam?
Yeah. I mean, I think in small business, and particularly in family business, one of the challenges, it can be like everything in conflict, it can be a challenge and an opportunity, right?
Yep.
One of the things that can be challenging, say, in a family business is that everybody's got a really strong personal relationship already.
Yes.
So you've got a relationship where you can agree and disagree about things in your personal life, but then you sort of put them into the workplace context rather, and then you've got personal relationships that have to interact in a business setting.
Yes.
You know, where you might have a management role, a hierarchy, or different positions in an organisation. And overlapping that personal relationship with the business relationship can be a little bit tricky. In some ways, it should be easier to manage conflict when you've got a family business because you guys know each other well, right? You've got history. What makes it trickier is that you've got emotional investment. And when emotions are higher, we tend to be a little more reactive. Triggers are often emotional, so you'll have more emotional triggers when you've got a family or personal relationship. And you can also sometimes maybe be a little more over the top than you would be with someone who you don't have a personal relationship with. So you can say things maybe a bit more bluntly than you might do with someone who you don't know very well.
Yes.
So I guess there's those sort of tensions in family relationships. And I think when you're working together, there's a whole lot of different pressures. So you have individual pressures on things like getting work-life balance, or, you know, you might have sick children at home and you're worrying about them, but then you go to work and you have to try and put your family stuff to the side and concentrate on business. Individuals have competing stuff going on. Teams, you know, you might have a little group who are concentrating on sales and someone else who's working on product innovation. They might value what they're doing more highly than the other group. So you have kind of group competition going on.
Yes.
And then you have the hierarchy. So, you know, the shareholder level might be worried about profits, but the people who are dealing with the clients face to face are worried about having good relationships with the client. So they might invest more time that financially might be seen as not cost effective.
Yes.
So I think you've got all these different layers going on at the same time. It gets messy, right?
Yes,
not everybody
absolutely.
have everything they want at the same time. And you've got to figure out ways to acknowledge that you don't always get what you want,
yes.
And still be able to get on and try as much as possible to keep everyone happy, but also live with the fact that not everyone is always going to get what they want.
Wow. Yes. I think you've just really summed up all the complexities in a business, isn't it? Very much so. So there's really not one specific thing. It's the whole dynamic of a business, and particularly if it happens to be in a business that's a family environment, can add heightened emotion to it too. But just the whole space, the whole dynamics there of a business can cause conflict with competing interests. So then perhaps we might go to the next space then, is then as, not just as a leader, but just even as somebody working in a space where there is conflict, or that they, well, not even if there is conflict, it's just helping people build resilience and confidence to speak, to work through the conflict that's going on. What are maybe a couple of tips that you can share?
I think there's two absolute key things.
Yes.
Don't avoid it, okay? It often seems easier to avoid it. Oh, I won't have that hard conversation, or I won't have it right now, or maybe if I just stay out of that person's way, you know, I won't have to deal with the differences that we have. Avoidance feels easier in the short term, but I guarantee it'll come back to bite you later.
Yes.
The longer you avoid addressing something that you need to talk to somebody about, the worse it gets. The harder it is to have the conversation, the more things build up and become magnified, and, you know, the more those extra little things get added to our mental whiteboard of complaints. You don't want to get to the stage where your whiteboard's full and you're going to slam it over the other person's head when you actually do talk to them. So I think that the main thing is, don't avoid conflict in the thinking that it's going to be easier, because it gets harder and harder the longer you avoid it.
Yes.
And I think associated with that, it's the flip side. Try and deal with things early, and try and get help. If you're not feeling confident and competent, get some help. It might cost a little bit of money. It's not as expensive as what it might cost with lawyers if it gets really bad and you leave it too long. Get some help and get in there and build up relationships, repair problems in relationships, and develop strategies for communicating across differences. You know, we're never going to create an environment where everybody always gets what they want, where everybody always thinks the same way. There's differences that are always going to exist. Conflict has to exist. It's a really good thing, but we need to have strategies to feel comfortable with it, feel confident about raising differences, and to manage relationships through differences. I think they're the key things for me.
Absolutely. Oh, gosh, again, there's quite a chunk in that too. So get into it early. So don't let it fester, and work through it. So bring it up and ask for help if you need it. So that's a really key point, that invest in yourself. I think that's a really key thing too, is investing in yourself, because that's going to help you move through the conflict and help you feel better. Because the last thing in the world, I think, that as a business owner you want is for staff to leave, or as an employee, is you don't want to leave your job because of conflict with another person. So, it's a small amount to invest for a really big outcome. So,
people are really reluctant to ask for help with conflict. And I mean, the best analogy I can think of is, those people, often people like my dad, I hope my dad doesn't watch this, but people like my dad who will have I'll give you an actual example of my dad. So my dad grew up in the 70s, was a mad water skier. It was back in the era where sun cream and sun protection, slip, slop, slap just wasn't on the radar. So he was always out there really tanned and out in the sun all the time. And now he's getting old, and he's getting lots of skin cancers, and some of them are turning into really problematic melanomas. But my dad is the sort of guy who doesn't like to ask for help. Big, strong Aussie guy, doesn't ask for help, doesn't go to the doctor. He had a really bad cold recently and finally went to the doctor to get some antibiotics for his cold. Yep. And the doctor was listening to his chest with the stethoscope and noticed a little mole on his stomach and said, I'm a bit concerned about that. And it turned out that actually it was a little mole on the surface, but underneath the surface there was a really big cancer growing inside his abdomen.
Oh, my
and it was
word.
really lucky it grew horizontally, and so it didn't get into any of his organs, and they were able to remove it. But I think, and it's a kind of horrible example, but conflict that we don't manage is a little bit like that. It looks small on the surface and we kind of ignore it and we don't ask for help. But there's all sorts of horrible stuff going on under the surface. And if you don't go and get some help and address what's on the surface, really big stuff festers and grows underneath that can really cause big problems for you personally in your business if you don't deal with them. And I think we have to stop thinking of conflict as a dirty word, as something that we want to avoid. We have to try and think of it as an opportunity. Yes, there are risks, but it can be an opportunity, and there's no shame in asking for some help to manage it and for developing your competence and confidence. You're not going to have someone holding your hand through every conflict for the rest of your life. People can help you in those tricky situations, and you can develop skills to do it yourself in future. So I think, people need to really step up and say, it's okay to say I'm not feeling great about this and I need a little bit of help, but let's work on that. Let's develop myself with a bit of help so that next time this happens, I'm better prepared, but also that I deal with this situation early and constructively. I sound a bit evangelical, don't I?
No, but I think that I think it's really important that no matter what it is that you're doing, is that you need to value yourself enough to put boundaries in place and say, hey,
exactly.
I feel as though you're crossing a line with me that conflicts with my values, my morals, or something or other, that, and I don't want to be treated like this, or and because you also set yourself up for a precedent, because then you either deal with it and say no, or work through it, which can then build a stronger relationship, or else you give that other person permission to continue to treat you.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think, value yourself. It's so important.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you're feeling a bit unfit or unhealthy, you improve your diet. You might get a personal trainer. A conflict coach is kind of like a personal trainer for your conflict.
Yes. Yep.
They don't do it for you, but they help you figure out ways to get stronger and more confident and more healthy in the way that you go about things. And it has ramifications bigger than just that conflict. It increases your confidence as a person. It increases your capacity as a manager. It probably incidentally improves your home life, because you're not going home and stressing about conflict at home. And, someone once described conflict as a little bit like being a flea with the plague. When you're in conflict, it infects everyone around you, even if they're not directly involved, because you worry about it and stress about it and think about it and talk about it so much. It starts to eat up other people who's in your family and your friends.
Very true. Absolutely, very true. Now, Sam, you, just so we can share with everybody, you work with people in a number of different ways. I think we shared it at the start, but we'll share it again now, is that you do work one-on-one work. So specifically if somebody is going through conflict, you're available for one-on-one coaching sessions, conflict coaching sessions to help them through that. And that generally takes about how many sessions do you generally work with for people?
Oh, look, it depends. Sometimes I would say a normal conflict coaching relationship is about 6 sessions, about 6 90-minute sessions, maybe over a 12-week period. So in a workplace conflict, I might meet with someone for 1.5 hours every 2 weeks. It can vary a little bit depending on how urgent the conflict is, how complicated it is. Sometimes one coaching session, and you know this, Tash, I know from when we did the coaching practices in the class that we did, one session can be enough to really change someone's thinking and then, open up opportunities in a conflict. So sometimes one session can really make a significant impact.
Absolutely, yes.
So I can do conflict coaching with people. I also can do mediation. Mostly at the moment, I do things actually using platforms like Zoom because it's easier for people sometimes than having to go to a physical place, and it can be a bit more private and relaxed if you're in your own space talking to someone. That's my professional services, largely through Zoom and Skype at the moment.
Yes. And then you also do training too. So you offer training, you facilitate courses. So I know that the course that I did with you was actually part of the master's program, but that exact same course is also offered as professional development. And that's just one of the professional development courses that you do. So I am correct in saying that, aren't I?
You are correct, yeah.
Yes.
So my history, for the past 20 years, I've been teaching in universities, and university study is fantastic, but it's not accessible to everyone. For example, if you haven't, and most of the university programs in conflict management, conflict resolution are master's programs. So if you don't already have an undergraduate degree, you can't access them, or unless you've got a considerable amount of work experience that the university deems as equivalent. So they're not that accessible to people, and often in a university context, there are university requirements around assessment. So you might have to do academic essays and things. And what I started to realise was not everybody wants to do that. They want practical skills that they can get in there and use in their day-to-day business life or personal life. And also that you don't need to have an undergraduate degree in psychology to be able to learn these things. So I wanted to set up some online training that's flexible so people can do it anywhere in the world at any time of the day or night that suits them, that's based in really good academic theory and research, but is presented in a way that's really accessible and practical. So through my business, CCI Academy, and I'm sure Tash can give you links and things at the end, there's a range of training, and therefore individuals, managers, and businesses sometimes put groups through them. And they cover things from understanding conflict styles, general conflict competency. You can do a whole conflict coach training program. It's about 40 to 50 hours of training, so it's a big course. Yes. And I've also got a really cool one at the moment called Conflict Management for Leaders, and it's aimed at people who want to take a leadership role in a business, or even just in sort of their daily life, who want to be seen as a leader in conflict management. Because let's face it, if you're a leader in any organisation, whether it's big or small, in any industry, you're going to have change and conflict. That's part of our world these days. And so you need to have skills to manage it. And very often people become managers because they're good at their discipline, they're good at the area in which they work, and then you might not necessarily have had any conflict management training, but I guarantee as a leader you're going to have to manage conflict. Absolutely. Either with your staff or with your clients and customers. And so this course is particularly aimed at helping people develop some skills, but also to think about themselves as a leader in a conflict situation. And one of the things you mentioned earlier is part of the course, looking at how we set up effective boundaries. How we set up boundaries to protect our staff, to protect our business, and to protect ourselves, and to make us into a really good leader who sets boundaries and keeps boundaries and maintains them. So a little bit of an advertorial there.
Well, I cannot speak highly enough of it, really. I mean, I cannot advocate enough for the program that I did, because look, I came into the space with not a legal background or a conflict background, and it's definitely was never my intention to get into that space. But I the reason I went down that path was because I wanted to learn how to work better with people and understand people better. So in my workspace, and I honestly, from having done the program with you, I would recommend it absolutely to anybody whatsoever, whether you are a leader or not. The fact that you are in a business or in a workplace, it just teaches you the skills that you need to be resilient and to manage conflict in your life. For goodness sakes, even if you are a mother of teenagers, you'll get benefit out of this program.
It's life skills. It's basic life skills, isn't it?
Really
and if people are super keen, Tash, actually, this is a little sneak preview. I've actually got a new enhanced program starting in June. And this is for people who are really serious, right? Who are really serious about, having a more peaceful future and really stepping up as a conflict competent leader. What I'm offering with my course now is you can do an enhanced program where you get the training plus coaching. So you have a coaching session with me every week or every fortnight along with your training. So while you're learning, you also have someone who's helping you apply it to your specific context, helping you to reflect on things that you might be trying. So that's starting in June, actually. That's the super duper for people who are really serious about world peace. No, not really, but who want to take their management skills to the level of artistry. Let's not just be competent, let's be artists. Let's be awesome.
I love that. Love that. That is fantastic. And I think too, for as we spoke about at the start, is that for you as a trainer, you teach this or train in this area globally, and that you have set up your own accredited program as well.
That's right.
And to get a program that's accredited is no small feat. It's definitely
a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that really speaks volumes for the level of training and support a person would get or a business would get from working with you, which is fabulous.
Yeah. And if you've got a group, we tailor them as well. So for certain organisations, we've tailored the training to fit your particular context. So if you work in health, we can tailor it to typical conflicts in health. If you work in government, we can tailor it for government. I do a lot of work with people in family conflict at the moment, so we tailor some training around helping parents in conflict manage caring for their children, those sorts of things. So there's a whole lot of scope. The world's your oyster. If you want something around conflict, ask me. I'm sure we can come up with something.
and look at you. I mean, you're clearly working in a space you absolutely adore too.
I do love it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think my mission statement is something like world peace and then cocktails on the beach.
Beautiful. Like that.
I mean, it's a big goal, right? But hey, why not aim high?
Absolutely. Now, people can find you. Conflict Coaching Academy is your website.
CCIacademy.com.
CCI, sorry.
Yeah. There's conflictcoachinginternational.com, which is my practice site. And then if you want to look at the online training site, it's CCIacademy.com.
Right. Thank you. Because you could see me thinking, like, where does the I fit in? And of course, social media to LinkedIn. You're on Facebook as well. So for people to come and seek you out, and Instagram, so people can come and seek you out there, get a little bit of a feel, get a bit of a vibe, but definitely reach out and have a look at some of the programs Sam's offering, because they absolutely are fabulous. So,
there's a free one, my top 10 tips for managing conflict. There's a 1-hour mini course, and you can do it for free if you want to just check it out and see kind of what it looks like. You can do that for free.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'll make sure that I put the link to that too then with this video. Sam, thank you so very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I think that you have shared some absolutely amazing tips and strategies in how to deal with conflict in not just personal life but business as well, so which is fantastic. Now, just before you leave, can I ask you please, what is the one piece of business advice, or the one best piece of business advice that you've received so far that you'd like to share with us?
I think the best bit of business advice that I had is be authentic, be yourself. So, no matter what business you're doing, don't hide behind an image or a logo or, some professional version. I'm not saying don't be professional, but be authentic, be yourself, because people want to connect with a human person these days. They don't want to connect with a business. And so for me, that's the key, to be yourself, be professional, but be yourself and be a real human that people can relate to. And you do that so well, Tash. I mean, I think you're a gold star example of that. You know, Tash is Tash, and that's why people connect with you so well, because you're a real person.
Yes, I can't be anybody else. I don't think that I'd do a very good job of it.
But you do an awesome job of being you, and that's the important thing.
Absolutely it is. Sam, thank you so very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Now, everybody, thank you so much for being part of today's episode of Tash B TV. Really loved having you here. And of course, as always, would really, really love to hear your thoughts and your key takeaways from today's episode, because I think there is so many gems that Sam has shared with us. So please feel free to share them with us. Outside of that, go forth and be amazing. Thanks. Yay. Thank you.
That was fun.
It was so much fun.